Welcome to Ear Biscuits. I'm Link.
And I'm nervous.
Yeah, man, this has been a long time coming.
Actually, my name is Rhett, but I am nervous.
And today we're going to be talking about Rhett from the YouTube channel Good Mythical Morning as he talks about his spiritual deconstruction.
The show you're actually watching is Switching Sides, the show where we take a look at religious conversion and deconversion and discuss how and why they happen. The subject of today's show is the popular YouTube personality Rhett McLaughlin, who, along with his co-host Charles Lincoln, came out last year as a former Christian who's now an atheist. But I'm not going to be examining his deconversion story directly. Instead, we're going to be looking at how another YouTube personality, Braxton Hunter, responds to his deconversion. So Braxton is a Christian apologist, meaning that he's a Christian who makes an intellectual defense of Christianity against critics. Rhett is far from the first high-profile atheist who's recently made a very public statement about his deconversion. It's actually becoming very common recently, over the past 10 years or so. And some of these individuals, when they come out, receive more publicity than they ever did as committed Christians. Understandably, apologists like Braxton take notice and respond to these public statements. Deconversion is a concerning matter to Christians. For one, when individuals like Rhett talk about their deconversion, they tend to criticize their former religion. Also, the more publicly these stories are received, the more influence they potentially have over religion, especially youngsters that are religious. And then there are theological concerns. Were these people actually Christians? What about issues of salvation and so forth? So I'm not here to solve theological issues, or to assess the way in which Braxton and others address deconversion. What I am interested in are the underlying assumptions that these responses sometimes include. And I want to address how these deconversions are viewed and managed from the religious perspective. Let's hear what Braxton has to say.
Out that Rhett and Link were evangelical Christians because, hey, another way that they're like me. You know, these guys are a part of my tribe. They're from the South, North Carolina, I think. I've been all over North Carolina, was raised during my teenage years in Nashville, Tennessee, pastored a church in a place called McMinnville, Tennessee, which was a small town. You know, I kind of understand where you guys have come from. And I appreciated all of that. And it's just, you could relate then to the people on the screen. And I thought that was pretty cool. So it was sad, and I have to say heartbreaking, honestly, when someone sent a link to this video. One of our viewers last night sent me a link to this video about Rhett's spiritual deconstruction. Because I very much do view this, however you want to frame this up in terms of your personal doctrine of salvation, if you're a Christian out there, I view this as someone who was among us, who has gone out from us, someone who was a part of my group, part of my crew. And
after a person deconverts, there's a crisis that happens. The person has to reframe their entire lives because their identities were highly caught up in their religion. Rhett here, for instance, has been working for a Christian campus organization, providing media and entertainment material. Not unlike the kinds of material he produces now, except more focused on Christianity. And he continued to work for them almost up to the time when he decided he was an atheist. But the crisis doesn't stop with a deconvert. the entire community around the deconvert feels the crisis. This is a person they thought of as one of them. Now they don't have a good idea about who he is or how they should treat him. The transition is difficult on both ends, which doesn't make it any easier for their side.
Our science-heavy, education-heavy Western context, we're going to go through this time of deconstruction, spiritual deconstruction. I went through it. For those that know my story, I have a friend who began to experience same-sex attraction in college, or in high school, and then in college he identified as a gay man, and that led to a process in which he thought, can I hold on to the Bible and this lifestyle? And then ultimately he decided he has to pick one or the other, either the gay lifestyle or biblical Christianity. And he had to make a choice, and he made a choice for the gay lifestyle. Eventually embraced atheism and then began to challenge my faith. And at that point, I did this whole thing that he describes throughout this episode. I took my faith apart and put it back.
There's actually a significant link between atheism and homosexuality. Some of the more prominent atheist researchers have done a comparison and have shown that the coming out as an atheist after deconversion has most of the features, including the identity struggle and feelings of marginalization, as a homosexual person who comes out. When an evangelical Christian begins experiencing same-sex attraction, this increases the probability that they will exit the church environment. The church environment becomes uncomfortable, and their sense of identity begins to transfer from religious beliefs to matters of sexuality. Equally, evangelical individuals who form close relationships with homosexual individuals are at an increased probability of leaving. In my case study, disagreement with sexual ethics in the church, rated as the second most frequent complaint, right behind problems with the Bible, from people who, as they are deconverting.
From what I pick up during the course of the episode, it sounds very much like it wasn't that there was no evidence for the truth of the Christian message. Now, he might say that. But I don't think he would, considering he talked about how it's still a reasonable position to believe in God and all those kind of things. It sounded more like the evidence doesn't give me certainty. And if the evidence doesn't give me certainty, then why would I believe this given certain ramifications that it has? And we're going to get to that point in just a few minutes when we look at a list of things.
This, to me, is one of the most interesting features of deconversion cases. And we're going to see it come up several times as Braxton continues to address this. Deconverts tend to come from church environments which stress certainty or high degrees of confidence. If you aren't certain of your salvation, you're in dicey territory. Or you have to be confident in the truth of Scripture. Doubts are seen as defects in one's religious commitment. And sometimes questions about belief are actively discouraged. In some ways, this sense of certainty is what gives individuals a kind of security in their religious beliefs. When one can be certain, one does not need to wrestle with a failure to comprehend, and there is less room for fear or anxiety. So high levels of confidence and certainty tend to be attractive within the religious environment. But this demand for high confidence also sets up a condition which facilitates deconversion when one experiences a lack of certainty or an increase in doubts. The very act of doubting becomes evidence against the system. I mentioned that high levels of confidence and certainty offer a sense of security. As a result, many deconverts report having a lot of difficulty entering a world where they have to say, I don't know, about the big questions, and have to come to terms with the uncertainties of life. It tends to be one of the many struggles when leaving religion.
He says that throughout the whole thing that he was trying to pursue truth, and that was what Christianity was supposed to offer, was truth. And I appreciate and admire that. And so I think that should be our guiding principle as we...
So Rhett McLaughlin attended a Christian college. This is interesting because there are several deconversion researchers who suggest that Christian education can contribute to deconversion. Not because it secularizes the student or encourages deconversion, and not because it fails to offer reasons to believe, but rather because it puts a high value on truth-seeking. What this means is that if you happen to be a high school graduate sitting in the pews, and you're confronted with problems related to your faith, it's easier for you to simply select for faith to avoid the questions. However, those Christians who have attended higher Christian education will have the value of truth impressed on them and will be encouraged to follow the truth where it leads. As a result, when students of Christian education are confronted with problems, they're less likely to dismiss them than a Christian who came from a public school or had no higher education.
I'm going to read these because I wrote them down. These are just a few of the questions I'd always avoided. If I don't have to believe that God ordered his chosen people to slaughter men, women, and children by the thousands, then why would I?
Okay, he's going to go through some of these things. If I don't have to believe that, why would I? Well, what do you mean by have to believe it? We're looking for truth here, right? This isn't about what we want to be true. Now, he says, if I don't have to believe it. So maybe what he means by that is, if there's not substantial evidence or sufficient evidence for me to conclude this must be the explanation, which again, I take to mean if I don't have Cartesian certainty about this, if there's a way to not believe this, why would I believe?
I want you to consider this. Deconversion is an escape behavior. What does that mean? It means that one does not deconvert in order to gain something desirable. They deconvert in order to escape something undesirable. A religious environment can bring with it certain discomforts. These discomforts might relate directly to the environment, like demands on your behavior. You must do some things, and you must avoid doing other things. This isn't comfortable. But in the case of most deconversions, the discomfort is more on the mental or emotional level. Here, Rhett is having some kind of discomfort with the idea of a God who would demand a slaughter. This is an idea that he has to hold in tension, and that's uncomfortable. But because of his studying, he's given himself permission to escape this uncomfortable idea. In taking this step, he relieves a certain intellectual or emotional strain. He no longer has to believe this thing, and this is a relief.
I don't want to mischaracterize, but it does sound a bit like that what we have here is, I had this view of young earth creationism. I didn't think too much about it when I was younger, but it was there. And I had this rigid understanding of the Bible. And I had these doctrinal positions about Calvinism and about, he mentions that on the show, and about what that means for original sin and what that means for Adam and Eve and all these kind of things. And when that, very, very conservative, very fundamentalist understanding of Christianity wasn't exactly the way that it is, the evidence didn't quite sync up with that like I thought it should, then the whole thing started to unravel. And I didn't have certainty anymore. And without certainty, why would I believe these things if I don't have to?
Let's walk through this summary for a bit here. Here I want to make something clear. Deconversion is largely a matter of setting conditions. What that means is the religious environment creates certain expectations and a certain framework around which the person builds their ideas on how to view the world. The scaffolding offered by the religious environment, these setting conditions, generally frame and contribute to the deconversion. An apologist like Braxton will take a look at the list of objections and answer them each, as Braxton has done. Check out his full video he made to see these answers. But in order to address the deconversion itself, it's not enough to answer these objections. You would have to address the background conditions, the basic religious foundations, which gave these objections potency. Earlier in the video, Braxton talks about how he once did his own deconstruction, followed by putting his faith back together again. And when he did this, it looked different. There are instances when deconverts will eventually become Christian again. But the kind of beliefs and practices they hold when they come back look very different than the kinds of beliefs and practices they held before they deconverted. So he talks about young earth creationism. Young earth creationism tends to be so significant in deconversion cases because the individuals are given an ultimatum by their church. If you do not take the creation story to be literal truth, then you bring the reliability of the Bible into question. If you do that, you can't be certain about anything taught in the Bible. And then we talked about the high value of certainty, or high value of confidence. He talked about a rigid understanding of the Bible. This is a feature I call textualism, meaning a high commitment to the line-by-line truth of the text. Textualism is highly prominent in the background of deconverts. He mentioned Calvinism. When I listen to or read deconversion narratives, it is surprising to me how frequently this negative reaction to Calvinism is brought up. Would have to dig into the research further, but Rhett's not alone in this one. The doctrines of Calvinism are brought up and disparaged more than any other doctrinal framework in cases I've looked at. He mentions fundamentalism. Scholars have noted, and I've seen this in my study as well, that deconversion comes almost exclusively from people who began in a highly fundamentalist context. Now, frequently these people migrate towards liberal or progressive Christianity before they deconvert, but they always begin in some flavor of fundamentalism.
I didn't want to reject this, Rhett says. And I believe him. He didn't want that. I think something changed through course of time because we came to this, well, if I don't have to believe this, why would I? But if you didn't want to reject this, and I'm taking you at your word, then why did you? Because
if you didn't want to reject this, why did you? That's the question, isn't it? It would take me some time to do a full analysis of Rhett's deconversion, which I've done on my own research, but I'll try to summarize it here succinctly. Like every deconvert I've ever studied, Rhett grew up in the church. He identified as Christian by default, because that's where he came from. Rhett centered his identity around his Christianity. He started a Christian band and he went to a Christian college. He almost immediately got involved in the Christian youth organization, and then he joined the organization in a missionary capacity. This was his entire life. This being the case, he wasn't particularly inoculated against non-Christian ideas. He lived his entire life in an insular environment and had no mental or emotional preparation to handle ideas or experiences external to the Christian environment. Over the course of his adult life, there was an accumulation of stressors, meaning experiences or ideas that were challenging to his beliefs. So possibly due to his religious education, Rhett began to explore these stressors. He made rescue attempts, meaning he attempted to find ways to shore up his faith against these difficulties. At this point, he began what I call leftward drift. This is a process in deconversion where the person tries to rescue their religion by taking a less fundamentalist stance on things like theology and social issues. After leftward drift has begun, every shift to the left brings up further problems. Because as you adopt those standards, there are more and more ideas from your fundamentalist roots which become problematic. Eventually, the deconvert reaches a point which Rhett discovered. They no longer have to hold these beliefs, and they become progressively unpleasant beliefs. The option to disbelieve becomes available. At about this point, Rhett had moved to California and a much more secular environment. Now, Rhett, in his deconversion story, tries to stress that it wasn't just him moving off to California and then, because he moved, deconverting, but his move to California did expand his options for communities and beliefs outside of Christianity. So the opportunity cost of leaving Christianity was reduced, making it a much less costly thing to do than if he was still in South Carolina in a heavily Christian culture and in a church. Now he's in a culture which facilitates deconversion more than the Christian culture of the American South would. See, deconversion is never just a series of questions, followed by a decision to walk away. It's a process. It's a process that begins with the expectations and ultimatums of your religious environment, and then the life experiences that follow over time. Rhett is in his early 40s right now. And this is about the average age that these high-profile deconverts end up leaving. So if you think about some of these leading names in atheism, like Matt Dillahunty, for instance, all of these individuals ended up leaving when they were in their 40s or thereabouts. And this is because these kinds of individuals, the visible ones, the ones that come out and talk, tend to be in their ministry field, like Rhett. And so this is not just their identity, it's their profession. Thank you for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have your own deconversion story, let me know. I don't often talk about conversion on this channel yet, but I like to do a video about that as well. If you want to send me your conversion story, I may pick some of the best and do an analysis video on conversion. This is Switching Sides.